I'm Jen Langeskoff, Education Programme Manager at Festival Bridge. I'm going to just talk a little bit about Native Creatives. Some of you will be hearing this now for the fourth time if you've come to every single one of the sessions, but I think it's really important for everybody to know what it is that we're doing. So following our very successful series of events last October on mental health and wellbeing for teachers of the creative arts, we found that there was a real gap in the support and provision of you as artists and as educators, and we thought, what can we do to help support that and to help develop you as creative practitioners, but also for your personal and your professional life. So we have developed Native Creatives, which is going to be a series of events, of programs, which will be over the next 18 months, hopefully beyond, but who knows. And we will be focusing on different kind of themes and different ideas as we move forward, which is why we really need your feedback at the end to hear about how you want to develop your practice as artists. It's obviously open not just to visual artists, it's dance, music, theatre, creative writing. Even if you just have an engagement with any kind of arts and culture, please do feel free to come to every event, share it amongst your friends, your colleagues, and really feel this is a place to connect with other artist educators, other arts organisations, other artists, and really try and find that space to develop your own practice and your connection to like-minded people. We've had a brilliant event so far. We're halfway through now with Pat Thompson yesterday and Suba from Academy Dance. We've had Susan Coles already, who I believe is with us again. We're about to have the amazing Bill Lucas, and tomorrow we'll follow with Sketchbook Circle and with Frozen Light. So it's going to be a really good programme, and we hope we can continue that in the next event in June. So do follow us on social media or get in touch with us. We are going to put a Jamboard into the chat box. So at the end of the session, there it is. Thank you, Georgia. If you are able just to give us one sentence of feedback, it's just really helpful for us to develop for our next programme and for Bill. I'm going to introduce our speaker in a minute. If you'd like to ask any questions, please do drop them into the chat box, or if you want to save them for later and run them through Twitter to Bill, that would also be great. And if at the end you feel like being brave and waving your hands or putting the icon up to wave your hand to ask a question, then please do. We really welcome seeing your faces and having live questions. I feel it just works better. And in fact, Bill and I were just saying that people seem to have stopped asking questions so much. So I'd really welcome any kind of questions at the end, or just, comments that you want to make. So without further ado, there are people still dropping in, but I'm going to introduce our expert guest speaker for this afternoon. So Bill Lucas is a Professor of Learning at Winchester University and Director of the Centre for Real World Learning, the CRL. He founded CRL in 2008, together with Professor Guy Claxton, whom he has also created one of the biggest teacher researcher groups in the world, the Expansive Education Network. Bill is co-founder of Rethinking Assessment, a movement arguing for a major overhaul of the assessment system in England. In 2017, Bill was appointed by the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, as co-chair of the Strategic Advisory Group for the 2021 PISA Test of Creative Thinking, which will draw on the work of the CRL. The PISA 2021 Creative Thinking Assessment will provide policymakers with valid, reliable and actionable measurement tools that will help them to make evidence-based decisions. In 2018, he was invited to join the Durham Commission on Creativity in Education as an academic advisor and was subsequently co-author of its first report in 2019. He's currently curating a new online platform, the Creativity Exchange for Arts Council England, which I think he's going to talk about later. Bill is known internationally as a speaker on the subjects of learning, change, creativity, healthcare improvement and leadership. He travels extensively to present keynotes internationally and is a prolific and award-winning writer, and has authored and co-authored over 40 books and chapters and many peer-reviewed papers. With Ellen Spencer, Bill is the author of Teaching Creative Thinking, Developing Learners Who Generate Ideas and Think Critically. His latest book is Zest for Learning, Developing Curious Learners Who Relish Real-World Challenges. Native Creatives and Festival Bridge are absolutely thrilled that Bill has been able to join us this evening and will share his acclaimed model of creativity in use in schools in more than 30 countries to make a strong case for the importance of creativity in our lives today and suggest ways in which schools and those working with them can cultivate creativity in young people. It's absolutely my pleasure to introduce Bill Lucas. So over to you.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks very much. I'm just going to share my screen, and here we go. And just make that a larger image and swap view. And Jen, just wave at me if you can see that now. Great. It's absolutely wonderful to be with you today. I actually do come out your way, as Jen knows, because we've worked together on other things. In fact, as part of the Expansive Education Network. Thanks for that very generous introduction, far more than I deserve. I'm going to talk to you for about 25 minutes, and then, as Jen said, if there's any energy, we'll have a chat. If not, we'll do that virtually. And I want to explore the topic of creativity, what it is, why it matters, and just some thoughts, some beginnings to think about, starter ways of beginning to think about how to develop it, mindful that many of you are going to be experts in this as well. I'm hoping that you'll listen to this with two minds, either with your teacher artist hat as to what you might do, but also secondly, as an individual yourself, somebody who might wish to further develop your own creativity. Feel free to tweet if you like tweeting, or not if you don't. If you do, that's me. And you've already got a hashtag for the festival, and hashtag Creativity Exchange feeds into the Creativity Exchange site, which I'll tell you more about when we get there. As Jen said, I've written quite a lot. Here are just some of them. I guess I'll be drawing on teaching creativity, teaching creative thinking and zest for learning most of all, but I'll move around, I'm sure, as we get going. So think of a school near you. This is an imaginary year 7 secondary school, but I could be talking about primary, although the subjects would be looking slightly different, or upper secondary, and the subjects would start to have things like GCSE and possibly A-level in them, or vocational if that was your bent. And of course, the obvious thing is that creativity is invisible. So when we're thinking about creativity, we need, I'm going to argue, to think more precisely about what we mean by that abstract noun, and then think creatively about how we can embed it in the life of a school and all those working with a school. Once upon a time, we thought that the earth was flat, and that if you sailed from Norwich, hypothetically, ish to Sydney, you'd fall off the edge of the world. Once upon a time, we thought that young people, children, were empty vessels, simply hungry to be filled up with knowledge and then sent out into the world. Of course, we know now that the earth is round. Our geographic sciences have led us to see that sailors will return unharmed and unbitten by a malevolent dragon lurking underneath the 2D surface of the imagined sea. In the same way, our understanding of learning and the learning sciences and what it is to be creative is changing dramatically. We know that young people have a lot to offer from the moment they arrive. In fact, in many ways, they're at their most creative. Obviously, they're least knowledgeable when they're very young, and they're full of questions, as anyone who is a parent or a teacher will know. So let me start by just unpacking what it is. Let's go back to a famous definition just over 20 years ago. So Ken Robinson, as part of the commission that he led, the UK National Advisory Committee on Creative and Cultural Education, came up with this definition at the top of the page. Fast forward by 20 years and a bit, and you get to the creative thinking test that I'm part of. And it's defined as the competence to engage productively in the generation, evaluation, and improvement of ideas that can result in original and effective solutions, not that are original, but that can result in original ideas, advances in knowledge, and impactful expressions of imagination. Yes, you can tell that was written by a committee, and it's all we could do to hold that together. But I hope you feel that there are some good things there. And if you wanted a graphic description of creativity, then I think Ron Beghetto's and James Kaufman's model, 4C model of creativity, is helpful. Mini C is what very small children do when they have an idea, which for them is the first time they've ever thought that. Little c is the thing that we do when we're generating ideas, deepening ideas, using our imagination, using our curiosity, working with others to think things through together. Pro C is what one might do after lots and lots of practice. And it might be as an artist, for example, you are a professional, professional creative individual. And big C, just those very few members of the world who are, if you like, genius, who make astonishing leaps in the arts or the sciences or the humanities or in any aspect of human endeavor. So that's the sort of framing of creativity in general. Now close the lens a little bit on the Durham Commission that Jen referred to. And here are the definitions we came up with there. If you're familiar with the Arts Council strategy, you'll recognize that the definition of creativity is at the center of Let's Create, the Arts Council strategy. Creative thinking is the process by which you exercise your creativity. Creativity is an abstract noun. It's very big. It's got all sorts of elements to it. And here is our best attempt to describe the kind of things that you're doing that may appear spontaneous, but can be underpinned by perseverance. In fact, often are, I think, experimentation, critical thinking, and often social. Doesn't mean you can't be creative on your own, but very often we're solving problems or challenges or exercising our imagination in a group. Teaching for creativity is quite intentional, quite explicit, and I think it's where I'm going to be spending most of my time probably. And that is where we look at our culture and our practices and we explicitly try and cultivate the creativity of all the young people in the school and around the school to which we're attached. Some 8 years ago, we were engaged by Creativity, Culture and Education to take that broad thinking about creativity in the abstract and see if we could develop a model for creativity that would find favor in schools. So 2 field trials later, this is the model of creativity that we came up with. It has 5 dimensions. If you think of this as a clock face, of being inquisitive, that's to say, wondering and asking questions, of being persistent, already mentioned, particularly important if you're perhaps out on a limb and wanting to explore an idea that might require you to dare to be different. It's collaborative in the main, not always, and that requires being able to share where you are and to give and receive feedback. And very importantly for me, and I suspect you, those of you who are practicing artists, will recognize the discipline part of this. It's not, we don't arrive fully fledged. Practice is really important. You can get better at exercising your creativity. That's hugely important in a school context. And finally, and a classic association with creativity, we can be playful, we can come up with ideas, and we can make new connections. They might be images or metaphors, or they might be a new invention, or they might just be a slightly different way of doing something. Our model was picked up by the OECD. That's the paper on the left. If you want one yourself, you can just Google it and you can download it, and is now being used in schools across the world. Here I am working with an arts organization in, well, I'm invisible actually because it's the children who matter, in Perth in Western Australia. It's a community arts group called Form. If you Google them, I've just published something with them today actually on creative leadership in schools, and you could get your own copy of that if that interested you. Here we're encouraging children not just to be creative, but to reflect on the processes that they're using as they exercise their creativity. Here we're now still in Australia, but we're east of Perth and we're in Sydney in a wonderful secondary school, high school, Rooty-Hill High School, probably the school along with Thomas Tallis School in London that is the most advanced secondary school exponent of the kind of things I'm talking about. And you can see that they've taken our model, the model of the 5 dimensions, and then they've wrapped around it keywords in the middle, thinking routines, I'll say more about that, and different approaches to teaching and learning. And there you can see my friend Zane in their resource space where there are posters like this all the way around the school. Why? Well, if you've got a timetable which is rectangular and has lots of subject disciplines on it, you've got to find some creative way of helping everybody understand what we mean by creativity and injecting it into the life of the school. Here I'm working with a group of wonderful teachers in the south of Chile, and the model is now in Spanish. This is a partnership between an extraordinary opera house on a lake in a quite deprived community in the south, in Frutillar, in the south of Chile. There's a school workshop taking place where colleagues are exploring how they might take this into their lived experience in school. And across the world, there are different approaches to this, and that's wonderful. And each place it's different, but it's intentional, and that's really important. So why does all this matter? I think it's always mattered. Personally, I think it's never been more important than now as we emerge from the pandemic. I think some of our young people have, and adults, and health service folk and carers have shown the most extraordinary resilience. And some will be feeling like they need some real love at the moment. And some will be nervous as they return to school, and some will be joyful, and some will be probably a mixture of all of the above. Well, one of the reasons why this matters is that the rest of the world is telling us it matters. In fact, we have a unique alliance of organizations saying creativity matters. So this is an economic perspective. The World Economic Forum doesn't really matter whether you call it a competence or a character quality. I think bits of creativity are sitting in both of those at the moment. I personally don't like 21st century skills. It sounds a bit evangelical to me. And if in 2021, we're still trying to figure out what they are, it sounds a bit dodgy and unscientific to me. Here's the OECD's version of that, remarkably similar, just a different kind of narrative, a different descriptive heading here. I rather like the fact that the OECD is making creativity and critical thinking skills a core element of what it's arguing all young people might be learning. We're traveling south now into the Asian Pacific zone, and you'll see a dreadful phrase there, if you can see the small type, transversal competencies. I suspect that if you're a teacher and you're returning to your staff room tomorrow and you say that you've been at this talk and you start talking about transversal competencies, your colleagues may reach for the sick bag. It's jargon, isn't it? But it basically means it cuts across subjects, and that's really important as a concept. In Singapore, it's called critical and inventive thinking. So many different words to describe essentially a very similar idea. Now we're back in Australia, where I was showing you two school models and a really nice image of the subject disciplines that you'll know in horizontal lines on the left, and then, in vertical lines, and then in horizontal lines, cross-cutting areas or capabilities, as Australia calls them, like critical and creative thinking. In Australia too, and specifically in Victoria, they've begun to specify what it might look like from early years right through to upper secondary as you get more confident and more capable as a creative individual. Interestingly, we're quite slow to catch on at this, I believe, in England. I'll say more about that in a moment. Whereas the Scottish Curriculum for Excellence and the new Welsh curriculum, with its focus on enterprising creative contributors who do all these things listed on that little set of bullet points on the middle bottom of the screen. These are exciting, and I think we're getting a little bit left in the slow lane, might I say so, in England. Across the world, the picture is of creativity increasingly being specified in the national curricula of countries, and that's exciting. The second reason why, or the third actually, if the first is that economists want it and the second is that educationalists want it, the third is that we are increasingly confident that we know how to teach it, and that's really important. Here's the result of field work over 2 years with a lot of kids and a lot of schools across 11 different countries. Published now, free. If you want to just Google fostering students' creativity and critical thinking, you can get your own copy. And here the important thing to notice is that the findings of this 4-year research project confirm our strong belief and now evidence that it can be taught. It's really important. If you simply came into school with some level of creativity and couldn't progress, it would be a cruelty, wouldn't it? The better, the more intentional you are, the more likely you are to succeed, and therefore rubrics, that's to say statements, clear statements of what we're looking for, is really helpful. That professional learning of the kind that we're doing now matters, that it takes time, and that there are many different ways to do it. I think that's really reassuring, isn't it? We don't arrive fully fledged. There's no one right way of doing this. We can exercise our creativity as we think about that. Sorry, that just went a little bit too quickly. It's an example, a fourth reason now that countries and states are beginning to assess this. This is the only state in the world at the moment that assesses critical and creative thinking, and it's the state of Victoria in Australia, where I've been working for several years now. And here's a supplement we helped the Melbourne Age to produce to reassure parents that we weren't going bonkers and that this was an important and useful thing for their children to be learning. In the PISA test, which will now be 22, not 21 because of the pandemic, we're looking at it in written form, in visual form. Social is kind of like common sense. And we're also interested in the intersection between creativity and invention and problem solving in science. There is, of course, and I think this is really powerful at the moment, a read across between creativity and happiness, creativity and well-being. This is the work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. If you've not read his work, The State of Flow, really important idea that when we're truly absorbed, we tend to be at our most creative. When we are at our most creative, we tend to be truly absorbed. And in that state of flow, when we might not notice others asking us to do things because we're in the moment, an athlete might say in the zone, we're doing great things and we're enjoying ourselves and we're getting really good feedback and we're probably producing all sorts of pleasure hormones that are making us feel better about life. Interestingly, there's emerging evidence, here's some work I've been doing in Victoria, that when you do this well in schools, it's not only not a distraction from improving results, it might actually help you improve results. I think for some teachers, this is really important to know, that it's not an either or, it's not some silly binary, and it's definitely not some lazy progressive alternative. It might well be progressive, but it's going to help students acquire a more rounded, expansive view of the world, which matters at the moment, colleagues, because if you're in secondary school, then a combination of a limiting number of creative and practical subjects at age 16, that's the EBAC, plus the inspections that Ofsted is required to carry out, leads to a tension in many schools' heads between the kind of things that we've recommended in the Durham Commission and the kind of things that schools feel able to do. If you know that it improves achievement, if you know that it has all these other benefits, then in your impact statement, in your 3 I's of intention, implementation, and impact for Ofsted, you can say that. So how do you do it then? Well, no one way, but there's a process at work here. And the first part of that process, step 1, is to really develop a full understanding of it. Because just as if you were teaching French or science or dance or pottery, you might reasonably expect the teacher to know a bit about it. This is not something that teachers will necessarily be trained at all for in their initial teacher training. So it's something that needs to feature in our professional learning. That's why an opportunity like this is so wonderful and great to be in a number of speakers, and great to have Susan on the call today, who I've talked with before about these matters. And I think you had Pat Thompson yesterday and others all adding different voices. Wouldn't it be very dull if we all said the same thing? Something about the climate, something about the pedagogies, step 3, and something about building learner engagement all the time. So let me just pull back from that and just walk you through that, just slightly more slowly, so you can get your head around this. I'm very happy to, this is being recorded, so people can look at this again. So you've got a chance to have a look at this and stop and start if that's helpful. So here's that model. This time Thomas Tallis's take on it. although you can see there's a very close similarity because these two secondary schools collaborate together. In the center of our model, you've got some key words like ask and wonder and question and speculate if we're taking the inquisitive habit. And then you've got 3 sub-habits, because inquisitive is still too big, isn't it? But when you start talking about challenging assumptions, then a teacher can begin to see the kind of skills that might go into that. A teacher can begin to see the kind of situations that might be helpful for young people. And then in the next ring out, you can see the kind of thinking routines and pedagogies, the next ring out still, that might be helpful. Taken together then, and by the way, if you like this model, Google Talis Habits, and they put all of their resources out on site, and the very wonderful John Nichols at Talis is constantly curating this space and filling it with terrific creative ideas. He's a photographer and he has that particular interest, and so there's lots of lovely film examples that you might enjoy. In the second of these 2 steps are some challenges for many schools, because many schools like to teach students and to teach them and possibly to tell them that there is a question to which there is one right answer. Of course, in the complexity of life, that is rarely the case. And in many cases, the opportunity for play at secondary level is sadly not as available as it might be. In many cases, we're simply not able to or willing to make the creative process visible. Now, it will look different in dance or in writing or in drama, and it may have different language, like improvise or rehearse or draft or try out or experiment or exhibit. All of these different words will be often discipline specific. Most importantly, I think, is number 10 here. We have such organized lives, don't we? And such timetabled spaces in schools. It's very often the case that a child might just be arriving in a state of flow and the flipping bell goes and off they get to go and do something else. So trying to find longer space, and sometimes through the co-curricular and extracurricular and work you might do with cultural partners, but leaving space in a busy life for the unexpected. Now, when it comes to teaching and learning, there are 3 key things, and they look like this. They're not the only 3, they're 3 that we've discovered to be helpful. It's really helpful mentally if you can think about a split screen. On one side of the screen, you've got what appears in the syllabus. You might be teaching history. On the other hand, you've got what you think of as making a component part of creativity. Let's say some aspect of empathy or perseverance. And you put those together, and let's say you're exploring the Tudors. You might want to know, if you were using your empathy, what it was like not to be a king, but to be a villain. Or fast forward, if you're looking historically at the Second World War, you might be wanting to exercise your critical thinking muscles to see whose narrative was appropriate. And you could apply that to any subject in the school curriculum. The arts lend themselves to this, but so do the humanities, and actually so do the sciences. It's a bit like this wonderful picture by Andy Goldsworthy. We have to cunningly thread the things that we value about creativity through the forests of these young people's minds and make it stick in an elegant and subtle and persistent way. The second thing that is really helpful is if you can start small. So if you're talking about a big idea, I don't know, like deep inquiry or deep questioning, then teach children a simple thinking routine, like think, puzzle, explore. If you're wanting children to get into the habit of collaborating and giving and receiving feedback, then help them by starting with think, pair, share. You can Google all of these. If you just go to the Visible Thinking site on Harvard's website, and you can have a look at those. And perhaps most importantly, or most immediately accessibly, there are a range of signature, the kind of the teaching and learning methods that have a thumbprint on them, that are the DNA or essence of creativity, like these, which seem to work much better than having children sitting in rows and being told what to do. In the COVID situation, this has been really challenging For many of my creative colleagues teaching creative subjects which require practical work, it's been nigh on impossible. There's been extraordinary creativity via Zoom and Google Classroom and Teams and all the rest of it. But this is something that I think our children have been really, really missing. By the way, I'm not saying that teaching children didactically is a bad thing at all. I'm just saying that that is the only, if that is the only thing you do, don't expect them to come forth with their own ideas and look to co-design and co-shape and challenge and do all those kind of things that I was talking about earlier on. Now, of course, it doesn't just need to take place in the classroom. Here is an example of some work I've been doing. If you look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words at the bottom with the Royal Yachting Association and their on-board program for children from urban schools learning to sail. You don't need to be from an urban school to do that. In Essex, you've got lots of opportunities. Then you might well be exercising your creativity as well as your teamwork and so forth. And there are, of course, all sorts of opportunities, aren't there, in cultural opportunities to stimulate our young people's creativity in both traditional and less traditional ways. That's the subject, by the way, of our most recent book, as Jen said at the beginning of this, Zest for Learning. Now, I want to just close by persuading you, urging you, asking you to go and have a play, to have a look at Creativity Exchange and see if you like it and see if you can find some ideas that might stimulate your own practice, whether you're coming at this from the school outwards as a teacher or as somebody working with a school, coming from the outside inwards. Either way, I hope, find things that might help you. It's organized by different articles and blogs and book reviews and really exciting and motivating case studies and links to practitioners across the world and very simple practical ideas and interviews and discussions with researchers. Not far away from you is West Rise Junior School, a wonderful example of a brave head teacher who teaches young people to look after water buffalo. Oh, by the way, they have a rather creative time as they're doing it. And there you can see Thomas Tallis School and another nice school, Ryburn Valley High School. We're populating this at the rate of about 1 a fortnight. So we'll build up a bank of really helpful resources. And here's one of our latest, very specific ideas, something that you can take off the shelf and go and make an explosion in a science lesson and think about the creativity therein. You mentioned Jamboard earlier on. It's something I've been doing a lot in lockdown. And here's just something I made very recently with some friends of mine, some colleagues, as we were mourning Ken Robinson's passing, but also celebrating his great work. There you can see, there are the kind of things that we were asking. What conditions need to be in place to support teaching for creativity, i.e. the recommendation of the Durham Commission. So I'm going to stop there. If you didn't get it, there is my Twitter handle. If you wanted to contact me, feel free to do so. If you wanted to continue dialogue in other ways, that's fine too. I'm just going to stop sharing and see if you're still there and still awake and still with me. Thank you very much for listening.
Wow, thank you, Bill. That was unbelievable. I've seen you speak before, and it's always so compelling what you've got to say. And my mind is slightly blown now of all the millions I know I want to ask you, but won't be able to think of this second. Teachers, colleagues in the room, would anybody like to put some questions? I have seen a couple in the chat box. I'm going to go back to them. Susan, of course, has a fantastic question, which I'm just going to, is she happy to ask that out loud? Or she might be full of them.
I've just seen your
or something. Have you ever managed to have a chat with Nick Gibb about creativity?
Well, funny you should mention that. I've not, Susan, but I'm not sure that I would be polite if I did. So at the moment, I've taken the view that we will not change the Minister for Schools' mind, and therefore we will work with the thousands of fantastic schools out there and those practitioners who support them, and we'll build a bottom-up revolution. Somewhere in the middle, Susan, I think, is the Arts Council, and I think they're playing a brilliant role at the moment. So personally, I'm dead excited by the shift that they're making and the resources that they're going to be putting into creativity collaboratives. If you don't know this, in April, the Arts Council will be putting out a call, and you might be a recipient here to clusters of schools working with partners, possibly working with a higher education institution, to gather together to experiment and explore some of the big questions that you might have about how to embed creativity in your schools. I'm really excited by that. It'll be a funded program, and I'm really excited by that. So I hope that will speak more effectively, Susan. What about you? Have you ever had that conversation?
I've sat next to him. I've had a conversation, creativity in education, but he doesn't really listen. He had a bad experience himself when he was a young child of an art teacher who told him to express himself. And he obviously found that very difficult to do.
Yeah.
Which is why...
Poor chap.
It's a reminder, isn't it? How careful we've got to be, haven't we? I know a number of people I can think of who were told that they can't sing or can't draw or can't... Like, we've got to be so careful about those things.
Yes.
In the model, the disciplined aspect of it and the collaborative are actually the most important to me. The others are quite obvious in many ways, but you've really got to be prepared to put deliberate practice into anything you care about, haven't you? Yes. And you've really got to therefore believe that you can get better and that you will make mistakes along the way.
And I think that's a really poignant thing to mention in this group of teachers and artists, that, you know, for your own practice and for the benefit of your teaching and your deliverance and the benefit of the children and young people, that you're continuing to practice and practice and practice and develop your skills and your passion is going to come through, and it's really, really important. So whether it's a child practicing in their environment in school or you practicing that at home, it's equally as important. We've got some questions here.
Yeah, they're really good.
Shall we? Do you want to go straight into them, Bill, or do you want me to? Do you want to?
No, I can see them. I'm just looking at Felicity's question about metacognition. There are a couple of new books just coming out of that. You've probably have you, Felicity, seen the stuff on the Education Endowment Foundation website? If not, you haven't,
not yet.
Okay, I'd start there because there's a really good reading list there that you could then spin out from that. I think you're absolutely on the money here. I think creativity and being creative is a very close proxy to learning and being a good learner. I think they're so closely allied. So you might start there. So I think they do probably come hand in hand. And definitely, I love the play notion. If you look at early years practice, it's creativity writ large, isn't it?
Yeah.
And somehow, as we get more subject and hidebound, as kids get older, it can become, not does, and go to Thomas Tallis if you want to challenge yourself there. Beth, that's a great question. If I've got time in a moment, I'll just stick the web reference to the piece I've just written for Western Australia, which tries to answer that question, and it tries to make an argued case for what you might do there. If you'll forgive me recommending a certain book that I've co-written, Teaching Creative Thinking, we've actually got the evidence in that, and we've got a set of frequently asked questions of the kind that you get asked by senior management wanting to find evidence for this. And you can see that I was just floating some evidence about its relationship with achievement, which I think you might find helpful. Local cultural educational partner, yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. Again, that's the other strand of this publication, which I definitely will make time in a moment just to stick in the chat or to upload as a file. I might be able to do that too. And I really like the STEM question as well. You know, I was on a call at some godforsaken hour this morning with my friends in Perth, and a number of the schools there are using the acronym STEAM. You may be doing the same, which is preventing us from further siloing. So frankly, engineers and creative artists should be working together. We share so much in common. We're multidisciplinary. We have a central creative or engineering design process. So we're very processy about the way we think about the world. We like to prototype and experiment and to improvise and to use our imagination. So I think that's a great question too. If you go on to if you just Google me and get to my university profile, there's lots of free stuff on STEM. There's a simple report that you can just download called Thinking Like an Engineer that has lots of very practical ideas, and learning to be an engineer, lots of practical ideas there. Claire, you've got a fantastic question called We there at the moment. You possibly hit the return key accidentally. Do you want to step up and tell us what that is? And that would give me a breathing space just to put a link in. I'm sorry if I've embarrassed you, by the way.
That's okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
I was just to say that we had some badges made that said mistake artist on them. And I always use that in our lessons, because I say that I've learned most from my mistakes. And it's only by making mistakes.
Very, very good. I just lost you at the tail end of that. I don't know if others did, but I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. I mean, again, if you wanted to some good I mean, many of your teachers say you know this, but the work of people like Carol Dweck and Angela Duckworth is just fantastic in this area. And you know, little simple things. Here's such a simple tip that Carol Dweck has, is that try not to allow the children you work with to say, I can't do something. Try gently to insert the word, I can't do it yet. And that opens up a whole range of possibility. And I think it's a lovely way, actually, in the arts as well, when people have something that they're struggling with, not only giving them the resources and helping them practice it, but also give them the kind of the mental equipment to keep going. I'm just going to put in the chat, there's the resource that I mentioned just now. And that's produced by a wonderful community organization, a bit like yours, actually, in Perth, and it's called Form. Any more questions?
Just having a look back over, is there a link for the Arts Council project from Dom?
Yep, I'll grab that now.
Yeah. Stephanie Lennon, who made a couple of interesting comments earlier on, but she said, I used to teach like this within the IB overseas, came back to the UK, and it's heartbreaking how our system is so backwards. Which
let me just pick up on that, because I think that's a brilliant point. I've just put the Creativity Exchange web link in the chat. The International Baccalaureate is the closest thing to heaven in terms of assessment. In the Rethinking Assessment movement that I'm very much a co-founder of, we hold it up as a model of the kind of thing we might aspire to. You'll know if you've been a teacher in it. It's a notion, it calls it the theory of knowledge. It's essentially, to go back to an earlier speaker, it's essentially about good learning. It's about metacognition. I'm just going to see if I can put sorry, I'm multitasking here. I hope you're impressed. I've just stuck the Rethinking Assessment website in the chat too, if you're interested there. Broadly speaking, our passionate belief is that at the moment, the education system values about 1/10 of what kids can do. And it would be quite nice if we could find a more generous conception as kids move through the system and then move on to employment or higher education or further education, that they had a much more rounded, you could say, portfolio, couldn't you? I mean, I think that's probably the right kind of image for that many in the arts would recognize. That would be a better description of what they can do.
Gosh, there's heaps and heaps of comments coming on now. What I would suggest that everybody does is get themselves straight onto Twitter, straight following Bill, following us, hashtag Native Creatives, hashtag Creativity Exchange, and let's keep the conversation going, I think, is the key message that we're trying to get with Native Creatives. I'd just like to say thank you so much, Bill, again, for an inspiring talk and for passing on all this huge amount of knowledge to us and allowing us to really use our brains on a Wednesday evening, which is great. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you if you came to Susan's talk earlier and the ones yesterday. As I said earlier, we've got Sketchbook Circle and Frozen Light tomorrow evening. Please do get in touch if you would like to help with the programming for Native Creators. We always want to hear your points of views, and if you are able to just to click the Jamboard and put one sentence as to something you've taken away from this particular session that Bill has given us, that would be absolutely amazing. The session is being recorded and we are going to put them on our Festival Bridge website. It'll take us a couple of weeks to get that sorted, but you can watch it again, pass it on to whoever you want to. That would be amazing. But there's the Jamboard link. Please do click it. And it's been great to see you. I hope to see many of you tomorrow evening. Thank you very much. And thank you, Bill.